a lot of people died because of that decision by the CDC at the time. They were not happy with me contradicting them, so that I was fired. CDC and other agencies lied about the vaccine, and that's the reason why we now have plummeted confidence in vaccines. People will then start asking, well, if they lied about the COVID vaccine, are they lying also about the other vaccines? I think he wants to know, and I want to know, and everybody should want to know what is causing autism. These lockdowns have a lot of collateral damage from public health.
Hello and welcome back to UnHerd. Those of you who have been with us for a number of years will remember the name of Martin Kulldorff. In the fiery and strange days of 2020, he was one of the three first signatories of the Great Barrington Declaration, along with Sunetra Gupta and Jay Bhattacharya, which advocated for a different approach to COVID. The controversy only grew from there. He ended up having to step down from his position at Harvard University, where he was a professor in the medical school. He's an epidemiologist and a biostatistician. We last spoke in 2024 after he had left Harvard, and I was hearing about that story. Since then, he has re-entered a position of extreme authority, I would say, and he is chair of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, which is the governing committee within the federal administration deciding rules on vaccines and the like. This was an extremely controversial appointment. Lots of people were upset about it, and there are other names on that committee that are also controversial. He hasn't spoken to us since then. I'm delighted to have him joining us down the line from Connecticut right now. Welcome back to UnHerd, Martin.
Thank you, Freddie. It's great to talk to you again.
Before I get into the detail, because what we want to talk about today is Robert F. Kennedy, the whole state of the debate around vaccines, but let's just allow ourselves a moment of reflection. It must feel strange for you. We've checked in almost every 2 years for the past 6 years, and at some points you seem to be at the top of the world, and other points you've been kind of ejected from the establishment. Now you find yourself back in the seat of power. How does that feel?
Well, I'm just a simple scientist who's trying to do my work as a scientist, and then the world sometimes acts in strange ways, so you just have to go with the flow, I think.
That's a very, if I may say, Swedish and level-headed response to what must have been quite a turbulent few years, to say the least.
Yeah, but as a scientist, you have to look at the science and base things on that. And I think it turns out that we were right about the pandemic, that focus protection was the way to go. And Sweden, who did implement the focus protection strategy, has the lowest excess mortality during the pandemic among major Western countries. So we were proven right about that. But of course, there's a lot of turbulence in the public health community now in the United States.
On the question of what the claim you just made, which I am not going to argue with, I've got to say that roughly Sweden was proven right and a different approach would have been better. Do you feel that's been acknowledged? Do you feel that you have kind of been able to have a victory lap, or do you feel that most people still would prefer to say that you got it wrong?
I think in the general population, for sure, when I talk to people who don't know who I am, I will ask them, what did you think about the pandemic response? Like the plumber or at the garden center or in the ski lift, and the vast majority knows that it was a mess the way that it was done in the US. So in the general population, yes. The former CDC director, Dr. Robert Redfield, he acknowledged that the Great Barrington Declaration should have been the way to go. So that was very nice to hear, I think. But I think within the public health community, people are still stuck and they can't fathom the thought that they got it wrong and accept that. So that's creating a huge problem with the public health community. And people don't trust public health because of that. And as long as they stick to that idea that they got it right and not understanding the disaster they created, there's not going to be trust in the public health community.
So part of what's happened since we last spoke, of course, Donald Trump won the election and Robert F. Kennedy became the Secretary for Health and Human Services. And one of his most controversial moves was to fire all of the members of this all-important vaccine committee and put you in as the new chair. Just to quote some of the reactions to that, there was a recent piece in the New York Times signed by, I think, up to 10 former CDC directors and acting directors. And they say Mr. Kennedy replaced experts on federal health advisory committees with unqualified individuals who share his dangerous and unscientific views. I'm afraid that's you they are hinting at with that remark. Mr. Kennedy himself says, what we did is we got rid of the conflicts of interest, we depoliticized and put great scientists on it from a very diverse group. And by the way, he adds, they are very, very pro-vaccine. How would you characterize the new committee that you are heading up?
Well, everybody, we have stated publicly, strongly support the use of vaccines. Within the vaccine scientists, I'm one of the ones who was most pro-vaccine. During the pandemic, there was a point where the CDC decided to take a pause on the J&J vaccine. I was opposed to that first internally because I was at the time on the CDC working group for COVID vaccine adverse reactions. But they didn't listen to me. They did the pause. The ACIP did not break it. They did not reverse that decision. So then I went out publicly saying that this is a bad thing because we can have young women who had some blood clots. They can get a different vaccines, but it's the older people who really need this vaccine, and we have a shortage of vaccines. So we should not make a pause on it. I think that pause, a lot of people died because of that decision by the CDC at the time. They were not happy with me contradicting them, so I was fired by Director Valansky for being too pro-vaccine. So that's pretty astonishing, I think. But then 4 days later, they reversed the decision according to my recommendations. So they did take the advice, but they were very upset and fired me.
So that's an example of how pro-vaccine you are. It's also true that you had a lot of critiques around the COVID era to do with the way the vaccines were mandated and implemented. Is it right to say that you thought they were over-prescribed to too wide a group, that they were over-promised in that claims were made about them that weren't true? How would you summarize your critiques of those COVID vaccines?
So the CDC and the government agencies, they lied about the vaccine. They falsely claimed that if you get the vaccine, you won't get COVID. That wasn't true. They said that the immunity from the vaccine is better than immunity from having had COVID. That wasn't true. That's a false. And they claimed that if you take the vaccine, you won't transmit it to others. But that we don't know. Some vaccines can reduce transmission, but a vaccine can also increase transmission. For example, if you have a vaccine that reduces the symptoms, but not the transmissibility, then people, instead of being home sick in bed and not infecting others, they will be out and about because they have less symptoms, and therefore they will infect more. So actually a vaccine can increase transmission. And for the COVID vaccine, we don't know whether it reduced or increased the transmission. So the government at the time lied, CDC and other agencies lied about the vaccine, and that's the reason why we now have plummeted confidence in vaccines. People will then start asking, well, if they lied about the COVID vaccine, are they lying also about the other vaccines? So we have a huge task ahead of us to increase the integrity of the vaccine policy and the trust. And that's going to take many years because of the damage that CDC and other federal agencies did during the pandemic.
I think some people will be listening to this and thinking, have I tuned into the wrong video? Because your boss, essentially, the person who placed you on this committee, I'm talking about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is perhaps the most famous, let's call him vaccine skeptic in the world. I mean, he has been campaigning for decades against various forms of vaccines. He's known to believe in the highly disputed, I would say, scientifically rejected connection between autism and the MMR vaccine, and still hasn't renounced that. How can you be a pro-vaccine advocate and accept a position from the world's most famous anti-vaxxer?
Well, if you ask RFK, he says that he's not against vaccines, and he knows that I'm very pro-vaccine. He also knows that I'm a very honest and conscientious vaccine scientist, and I will call it left or right, or like one way or the other, depending on what the data says. But I don't have the impression that he wants us to get rid of all the vaccines. So he said that he is not against vaccines, and he has also said that he wants us to use the science and solid science. So that's what we're going to do.
So for the record, on this question of autism that has been argued about for decades, do you believe there is scientific evidence connecting autism to the MMR vaccine, or do you think that is spurious?
I have not seen evidence that the MMR vaccine causes autism.
So do you think it is irresponsible to go around promoting the idea that there may be a connection, because one obvious effect of doing that would be to put people off having their kids vaccinated, and it could then lead to things like what we're seeing at the moment, which is measles outbreaks? I mean, would you go so far as to condemn people who are trying to claim there's a connection between autism and the MMR?
RFK held a press conference sometime in the spring about autism, and autism is a huge problem. There are many cases of very severe autism where the child is not verbal. My children has a friend whose big brother has severe autism, and it's very sad. So it's very important that we find out what causes autism. So RFK held a press conferences about the importance of doing that, and he was enormously criticized for that, which is absurd, because of course we need to know that. During that press conference, he didn't mention vaccine a single time. So I think he wants to know, and I want to know, and everybody should want to know what is causing autism. We have to look at a large variety of things. That's not what my research is, but those who do that needs to look at a lot of different things.
I mean, it is having a wider effect, though, isn't it? Because even the president, Donald Trump, who is known to be pretty pro-vaccine generally, I mean, he tends to be very proud of his Operation Warp Speed program to get a fast COVID vaccination. He put out on Truth Social just days ago, this week, he approvingly quoted a video, a historic video, between two people talking about autism and MMR. So it feels like that conversation is coming back and being allowed back into the room, which I think perhaps understandably worries people who believe that that kind of talk is dangerous.
That has been sort of talked about for a long time. But the reason that we have measles outbreaks now is different. So during the pandemic in 2020, the childhood vaccinations plummeted. And you can see from the CDC reports enormously how it went down in the spring of 2020. It has recovered since, but it's never recovered fully. So one of the things that we argued in the Great Barrington Declaration was that these lockdowns have a lot of collateral damage from public health. And one of those things we mentioned was plummeting childhood vaccination rates. If people are concerned about measles outbreaks, which they should have joined us and argued against the lockdowns during the pandemic in 2020. So that's a huge reason why we have now had this measles outbreak in Texas. The other reason is when the CDC say things that are not true about the COVID vaccine, people will question other vaccines. So that also have led to a lot of vaccine hesitancy. So the biggest anti-vaxxers in the United States that are doing the most damage are actually the people who are promoting who promoted the COVID vaccine mandates, who told things from government positions, who told things that was not true about the vaccines, and those who promoted lockdowns. They are the ones who are responsible now for the measles vaccines.
I mean, I would not argue with you at all, Martin, that lockdowns and kind of official over claims about the COVID vaccines led to vaccine hesitancy and are partly responsible for this dip in vaccination. But it can also be true that the current Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy, is not a fan of vaccines. I mean, I think that is an understatement. I mean, even in his current position, writing an article on Fox News about the measles outbreak, he was promoting cures like cod liver oil and vitamin A instead of focusing and prioritizing on vaccination. I mean, that does seem to be irresponsible, doesn't it?
During the outbreak, he was telling people to get vaccinated against measles. So I think that was a good thing. I think vitamin A is used if you have measles. I think that's part of the treatment, but I think so, but I'm not an expert on that because I'm not a clinician, so I don't know what is the best way to treat measles. But if somebody has measles, then it's too late with the vaccine. So then you have to do the things that are necessary for the treatment.
Just to be clear, is there anything about Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s public statements and attitude towards vaccines that worries you as a pro-vaccine advocate?
Well, my job is not to judge politicians one way or the other. My job is to do the work that has been assigned to me as the chair of the ACIP, which is to do public health recommendations on vaccines based on scientific evidence. And that's what I will do, and that's my role. During the whole pandemic, I took a principle that I'm not going to voice my own political views on other topics than public health, because that's one thing that has caused a lot of distrust in public health community. And I should say that we should not blame rank and file public health people, because they do a great job, most of them. There are a lot of people at CEC, the staff that I work with now as chair of the ACIP, they are great, they are fantastic to work with. It's really the public health leadership that messed up during the pandemic, and who I think now are actually harming public health. So, for example, this you mentioned the op-ed that was published in New York Times by a number of former CDC directors, where they falsely and accusationally slander us at the committee by claiming that we are unqualified, dangerous, and unscientific. That's simply not true. But when they do those accusations, there are people who trust us because we were right about the pandemic. So if people call us now anti-vaxxers, then other people say, oh, okay, if Martin is an anti-vaxxer, maybe there's something wrong with vaccines. So they are actually if they're doing that op-ed for political purposes, I understand the logic behind it. But they are harming public health by doing this. And it's actually quite astonishing and bad, because people don't trust CDC for the last 5 years during the pandemic. But when you now have older CDC directors who go out and make these untruthful statements about me and other members of the ACIP committee, then those are not true. They are slanderous. And what people then might say, okay, that's not right. Maybe you shouldn't trust them for anything they did to a CDC director. So now that puts into question what CDC has done, not only during the last 5 years, but during the last 25 years.
So you would say those people attacking you are actually making the problem worse?
Yes, they are. And nobody can claim that I'm not a vaccine scientist, because I've written many, many papers on vaccines. I helped develop the vaccine safety surveillance systems that CDC is using on a daily basis, as well as FDA. I have published, my research on vaccine has been published with CDC, FDA, scientists, and from many universities. So basically, if I'm unscientific, they're basically claiming that my research publications are unscientific, and that means that the whole community of doing vaccine safety is unscientific. But that's nonsense. So they're really harming public health by doing these false accusations.
I would say you're not the most controversial person on the committee, which I don't know if that's a good thing for you or not, but Robert Malone is probably the member of the committee you chair that probably raised the most eyebrows. And I will confess that we didn't even have him on this show, despite being sort of requested too many times during COVID, because I felt he belonged in a different category to you, who did remain scientific throughout that period. For example, he's been on the Joe Rogan podcast. He says that certain vaccines, mRNA vaccines, quote, are causing a form of acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, AIDS. Is that a scientific statement? And what do you think about him?
So I don't know him very well. We were obviously there on the committee in June. I have no complaints about any of the discussions or anything that he said at that June meeting. I'm sure that members of this committee might have said stupid things in the past sometimes. I'm not sure exactly what people have been talking about, but I don't think any of them has said something so stupid as the op-ed in New York Times of the former CDC directors.
Hold on. I mean, to have a member of the committee that decides the federal rules for vaccines, having gone on a podcast in the last year saying that mRNA vaccines cause AIDS, that's not just a sort of, silly thing and we must all be forgiven for saying silly things. I mean, you're chair of the committee. Is he an appropriate person to be on it?
So I haven't heard him say that, and I'm not going to criticize anybody for things that I don't know for sure that he has said. I mean, there's been a lot of accusations against me that are false, and I don't know if the accusation against him are false or not.
Well, I did check. I wouldn't have said that if I hadn't double-checked the quote. And he definitely does say that he thinks they cause a form of AIDS, and he also says they cause cancer. So maybe that would be something to look into. A recent change from the Department of Health and Human Services has been, as I understand it, that the COVID vaccine is no longer recommended federally for everybody. It's only recommended for people over 65 and people who have a pre-existing condition. Is that the right determination, do you think?
So I'm not going to you say anything specific, because at some point in the future, the ACIP is going to vote on the COVID vaccine. We haven't done that, so I don't want to sort of make up my mind on those things before we receive all the evidence. So the decision on the 65 years, that was done, I think, at the HHS level. We can compare that, for example, with Sweden, which is a very pro-vaccine country. In Sweden, it's only recommended for people above age 80, unless they're living in a nursing home or some other institutional setting, then it's recommended if you're less than 80. So in that sense, Sweden has a much stricter, more limited recommendation than the new recommendation in the US. And I think if we look at other countries, some have it at 65. I think it's different in different countries. This doesn't mean that one country is anti-vax and another one is pro-vax. As I said, Sweden is one of the most pro-vaccine countries, I think, in the world. Different scientific committees or scientists get to somewhat different conclusions. In general, I think that we have left the pandemic. We are now in an endemic stage. So we have a very different situation in terms of both COVID and the vaccines compared to where we were in 2020 and 21 and 22. So it's very natural to make changes in the recommendations for the COVID vaccines. But I don't know exactly what the ACIP will recommend. We will do some recommendations.
So why do you think Susan Menares either quit or was pushed out? Either way, this was the issue that brought her termination to a head. Why are so many different sets of experts so upset about this change? As you say, if it's true in Sweden, it doesn't seem, and it's true in other countries, it doesn't seem that it should be that controversial.
Yeah, I don't think it should be, and I don't know why it is. No, I think Susan Menares, I think she was fired by the president, but I don't know exactly what the reasoning was. I also know that she expressed concerns about the vaccine policy, but I find that kind of strange because it's the ACIP committee that makes these recommendations to the CDC director. So we are sort of her advisors to recommend things to her. And then she can accept or reject those recommendations. Typically, the director will accept the ACIP recommendations that are made, but not always, but typically. So if she was concerned about the vaccines, I don't understand why she would not have talked to me as the chair of the ACIP. She never contacted me during her tenure as CDC director, and I'm not sure why. She's not an expert on vaccines, so it would be natural to talk to those of us who are. And I've talked to many other people at CDC during my short time now as the chair of the ACIP, but she never connected.
You're already in post in this position when she quit, so she could have asked you.
Yeah, so I mean, she was confirmed after my tenure started, and I think she was there for less than a month. So if she wanted to understand more about the vaccines and talk to some vaccine scientist, I would have been delighted to talk with her.
But if you hadn't voted on it, how was it possible to change the recommendation on that vaccine?
On the COVID vaccine?
Yeah. Who made that decision then if it wasn't your committee?
the CDC as well as the HHS can make direct recommendations without listening to the ACIP. Typically they do, but they can do that. And I think that recommendation was done before we were appointed.
Right.
I believe before we were appointed. So eventually we began to vote on COVID vaccine, but we haven't yet. I mean, I think it's also very strange, the attacks on this committee, because we have met once in June, and all our decisions that we made that was pro-vaccine. We didn't make any anti-vaccine decisions. So it's kind of strange that these attacks are but I think it's for political reasons. I think it's political theater. So
why? It's just, this is a genuine question. I don't know the answer. Why would she have accepted the role if she didn't like the politics of the administration, only to have this kind of argument 4 weeks later?
I don't know. I mean, I don't really know anything about what went behind the closed doors, and I was certainly not involved. There were 4 people who resigned from the CDC, 4 leaders. None of them had connected with me either to talk about ACIP or vaccines. They all resigned because of vaccines. One of them I met at the June meeting, and we had good conversations. He made some good suggestions that was adopted by the committee. So he had his voice heard that, but I did never talk to him after that or before, nor any of the other 3 who resigned. And of the 4th, one of them has done research on vaccines, on influenza vaccine. That's Dr. Jenigan, but the other ones are not vaccine experts. So you would expect them to talk to me and other vaccine experts before they make that kind of decisions.
Final question for you, Martin. There's a move separate from the COVID vaccine to remove all vaccine mandates. This is being discussed in some states. I know Florida is one of those. What's your view of that? Should all vaccines be voluntary, or is it okay, in your opinion, for some to be mandatory?
So that's not an ACIP issue. We only make recommendations, so we don't create any mandates, and has never done so. Vaccine mandates, and other than the COVID vaccine, is typically for schools, so children, that if a child hasn't gotten the vaccine, they're not allowed to go to school, go to public school. So those are the kind of vaccine mandates
that is still mainstream supported. I just want to check in with you. Do you think that is appropriate to mandate vaccines in that way?
Well, I think the key issue is, like, Sweden does not have any vaccine mandates for children to go to school. Everybody can go to school whether they have vaccinated or not. And the vaccine uptake is very high because there's a trust between the population and the public health authorities. So the key thing is to reestablish the integrity and trust of vaccines. And if we have that, vaccine mandates wouldn't even be needed. At the same time, vaccine mandates can create suspicion and distrust of the public health authorities. So it's a very difficult issue. But it's not an ACIP issue to decide.
Why not? It's the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. Is this not an immunization practice?
It's the states who make decisions on mandates.
When are you next meeting and coming out with a new set of rules? Or is that later this month?
Next week.
Next week. Well, perhaps you might come on and we could talk about whatever the committee decided. In the meantime, let me just say thank you so much for sharing your time today.
Thank you. And I'm sorry that I can't answer all your questions, but I think that's what an honest scientist do. When we don't have a clear idea one way or another, we should say that. So. And when we haven't thought through something carefully, that might seem to think that we are not trustworthy or something. But I think the best way is sometimes not to have a very clear one way or another when we haven't thought it through carefully.
I can also tell that you're getting battle hardened to these kind of interviews. You've had a lot of them, of people asking hostile questions, and you're getting quite good at giving elegant answers that don't get you into too much trouble. May I say that?
I don't know if that's a compliment or if it's not, but I think maybe the latter.
Lovely to see you, Martin, as always, and do stay in touch.
Thank you, Freddie. Nice talking to you.
Our thanks there to Professor Martin Kulldorff, an old friend of the channel, and whatever you think about his views on vaccines, Robert F. Kennedy, or the Trump administration, one thing I got to say I appreciate is that he, unpaid, chooses to come on programs like this and answer kind of difficult questions, which is exactly what people on those kind of committees should do. Thanks to Martin, and thanks to you for tuning in. This was UnHerd.